Hello, everyone. Welcome to another interview hosted by the Midwestern Marx Institute for Marxist Theory and Political Analysis. I'm Noah Krajcievic, here with my co-editor Carlos Garrido, and today we're talking to a very special guest, scholar, fighter, teacher, and very good friend of all of us here at the Institute, Dr. Anthony Monteiro. Dr. Monteiro has been involved in the struggle for longer than most of us have even been alive, and even aside from his many accolades, such as being the most cited Du Bois scholar around, he continually brings us thought-provoking new ideas. So thank you so much for coming, Doc.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
Aprovecho. Injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Hello Doc, thank you for being here. Before we ask about the great event on Paul Robeson's 125th birth anniversary, which just passed last week, for those that don't know, could you talk a bit about who Robeson was? For me, the fact that such a stupendous human being is not more celebrated in our country depicts an archetypical example of what Winston called capitalism's twin evils of racism and anti-communism. So, can you tell us a bit about his life, about his work, and why you think, after having been one of the most famous individuals in the world, today the ruling class ignores or whitewashes him?
Well, Carlos, you're right. Robeson was a spectacular human being, a rare human being. There are not many like him in the history of humanity, certainly in the history of modernity. His accomplishments are generally known by people who know who Robeson was. He was an athlete, played 4 different sports at Rutgers University. He was an All-American, I think, in most of them. But he was also a brilliant student. Upon graduation from Rutgers, he went to law school. He got a law degree. But Robeson ultimately moved from the law to art. And, he matures or comes into maturity, into adulthood in the period known as the Harlem Renaissance, that is, the 1920s, focused essentially in Harlem, New York, but this was a great artistic, literary, and intellectual movement of African Americans. Among them, of course, was Robeson and Langston Hughes, the great poet, Duke Ellington and Fletcher Henderson, the great composers and band leaders, Louis Armstrong, of course, the virtuoso musician, and artists, painters would emerge from that spirit, such as Romare Bearden, Jacob Lawrence, and others. Augusta Strong, I should mention. Zora Neale Hurston, and others. It was this great period. Robeson was tapped for the theater first, and in a Eugene O'Neill play, and it was an off-Broadway success. He would go on to continue in theatric work. The high point of that, of course, in the early 1940s, when he played the role of Othello in Shakespeare's famous play Othello. But it was discovered that he had an extraordinary voice. One of the most extraordinary voices of his time. His range is known as basso profundo, and it is really a popular voice in Russia, and at that time the Soviet Union, which in some ways accounts for his popularity in Russia, besides the fact that he spoke Russian like a Russian. But he then went on to study in London at the London School of Economics, a School of Oriental Studies. And he focused upon Africa and Asia, but specifically Africa. And during his time there in the mid-1930s, he declared himself an African. He said, I want to be an African. I want to discover my cultural, linguistic, and civilizational roots. He said, I'm an American, but I'm an African American. But the 30s was a very turbulent time. It was the period of the global collapse of the capitalist world economy and the upsurge of class conflict, the organization in the United States of unorganized workers, of unemployed workers. This struggle combined with the struggle against racial oppression manifested in the fight for the freedom of the Scottsboro Nine, and so on. But this was all around the world. But then there was a countervailing force arising in Germany under the leadership of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, which was committed to subduing the working class in Germany and ultimately taking down Bolshevism and socialism in the Soviet Union. In this respect, Hitler was not much different than many Western politicians who also wanted to undo the working class in this militant struggle, something that had not been seen in the West since the 1840s, 1848 in particular, with the wave of strikes and so on. This was another iteration of that. So Western politicians wanted, capitalist politicians that is, wanted to take the working class down, and their long-term strategic objective was to undo the Russian Revolution and to bring down Bolshevism as they saw it. So Robeson returns to the United States and throws himself into the democratic and anti-fascist movements. When World War II breaks out, well, before World War II broke out, he joined with the Spanish Republic in fighting against the fascists who were trying to overthrow it. He went to Spain. He sang on the front line for the forces fighting against Franco and the fascists. He, at home, encouraged young men and women to join the fight in Spain, and so on. But then when World War II breaks out, he sees this war as an existential threat to democracy and to socialism. And a lot of people get it wrong. They think or thought that Paul Robeson should just be concerned with defeating Hitler and not the defense of socialism in the Soviet Union. He literally said during the period of McCarthyism, let me reintroduce myself. I am the son of a slave. My people laid the initial, through their free labor, produced the initial wealth upon which this nation is built. And don't tell me to go back to Russia. This is my country and I'm going to fight for it, by which he meant the fight for democracy and ultimately for socialism. But the thing that is seldom mentioned when people talk about Paul Robeson is his mastery of languages, his move in art and singing towards folk culture, towards the folk music of various civilizations and cultures. And he declared that he would not sing the works of classical music, but that he would devote his concerts completely to singing folk music. And he learned all kinds of languages. Some estimate upwards of 25. Emma Goldman, the Russian anarchist, said that he spoke Russian like a Russian. And he learned Chinese and sang the Chinese national anthem, which was the song that inspired the Long March entitled March of the Volunteers. And he sang that wonderfully and beautifully and inspiringly in Chinese. But the thing that is so interesting and impressive to me is how he used his knowledge of folk culture and folk music and working class struggles, along with his study of languages, to put forward a hypothesis concerning the oneness of humanity and the oneness of human civilization. And I think one of the most extraordinary observations that he made was that there was a linguistic link between the Bantu languages of Central Africa, in particular the Congo, and the Slavic languages of Central Europe. He said it was his familiarity and knowledge of Bantu languages which made his mastery of the Russian language quite easy, even easier than learning, for example, French or German. And he suggested that this was because there was a civilizational link between Central Africa and Central Europe. Now, that was not just an idle or passive academic observation on his part, because for him, that insight suggested that the differences which are assumed based on nation and race and language and culture are not as deep and not as profound as normally thought. That the most important thing that he observed about human beings and their cultures is that they are more alike than they are different. And to discover that, you have to go back to their ancient folk cultures, ancient narratives, ancient mythologies. and you have to know their languages, at least in their primary form, in their more ancient form. And once you do that, you see, as he would say, that all men are brothers, that we are linked in very profound ways. And hence, even though global exploitation and war had brought diverse people into contact with one another, what it showed to them is that we are more alike than we are different. And that is ironic, because the capitalist class and the oppressors and war makers always tell the oppressed that you are more different than you are alike. And Robeson countered that. So I would say, if I were to speak of the major careers in his life, there is the artistic, which is the singing, the acting, and to a certain extent, the sportsman. Secondly, there is the huge political part of his life, where he committed himself to do everything possible to end war and fascism and to usher in a period of global democracy and socialism. And the third is Paul Robeson as a scientist of culture and language, and his proposals concerning human civilizations and cultures and how much they are alike, and how the differences are not as deep as the similarities.
That is brilliant, and very much also, I think, like Du Bois, who embodies this unity of scientists and art at the same time, and a very superb version of being able to be at top of the line in both areas. But I think it might be good to actually play. There's a rendition of Beethoven's Ninth, the part of the Ode to Joy with Schiller's Word that Paul Robeson just does, I think, better than anyone else I've ever seen do it. And it encapsulates this ethos of all men are brothers very, very well. I don't know. Do we want to play that now, Noah?
Absolutely. I got it right here. There's nothing about a copyright, so I think we're good. I just want to say that this separation you talk about, that the ruling class tries to impose upon us. I think it's really important to point out precisely what Paul Robeson stood for, which is what Doc was just saying, that we have more in common than what separates us. We are closer together than anything else. We all are very, very similar. So, and like he said, all men are brothers, right? And I think it's interesting to see that and then counterpose it to some of the faux radicalism we see now, which basically takes this notion from the ruling class and brings it into itself, right? The ruling class says you must be separate, even after these, countless years of struggle to become more together. And they say, yes, we are separate. Anyway, to get on the togetherness thing, I'm going to share my screen real quick.
By the way, there's a good point to hammer that home. Leadbelly, his song on the bourgeois blues, he talks about how it's the separation. He describes it as a bourgeois phenomenon, something that's it's the bourgeois man that wants to separate people.
Yeah, that's very, very true. All right, here we go.
The setting of the melody from the choral section of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the words by Schiller, all men are brothers, alle Menschen werden Brüder. Praise to joy, the God descended, daughter of Elysium, ray of mirth and rapture blended, goddess, to thy shrine we come. By thy magic is united what stern custom parted. Why all mankind are brothers plighted, where thy gentle wings abide.
Man, even just that much of it is so powerful.
He switches to German after.
Yeah.
He had so many languages. He was such a renaissance man. It's incredible. We don't encounter people like that anymore. I think he had, like 18, 19 languages. Him and Engels were up there because I read that Engels had around 20 or so languages that he learned. So that's just absolutely insane. And, they've shown scientifically that the more languages you have, the more expansive your mind is and the more information you can keep retained and stuff. So just a brilliant human being.
You know what I find fascinating is the remark about the similarity between Slavic and Bantu. Was he said the from the Congo, those Bantu languages? That is, I mean, it sort of makes sense, but it's just so interesting to think about how much we have in common. That's also look who showed up in the last few minutes. What's up, brother? How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Our sportsman.
I'm excited to be here. I'm pretty tired, but I couldn't miss this one. So thanks for being with us, Dr. Monteiro.
Good to see you, Eddie.
Me too.
All right. Well, let's just get right into the next question then. So we talked about Paul Robeson, the man. So let's bring it over to the event you had in Chicago commemorating his 125th birthday. Could you tell us a little bit about that? From what I've heard, speaking to some of the preschool people, it seems like it was an absolutely fantastic event. It seems to like it went very well. But give us some details on it. What were the sort of themes and that kind of thing?
Well, Paul Robeson's birthday is April 9th, and we were doing this in May, celebrating his 125th year. And it was at the DuSable Museum. And this is a very important and historic place in itself. It was founded by Margaret Burroughs. Margaret Burroughs was a mentee of and friend of Paul Robeson's. Margaret Burroughs was a woman of the left. Her husband, Charles Burroughs, was raised in the Soviet Union. Charles Burroughs' father was a great poet, by the way, and he sent his son to the Soviet Union to be educated. By the way, Charles Burroughs fought in the Red Army during World War II. But in their home is the first DuSable Museum. And DuSable, Jean-Baptiste DuSable, is the Haitian, Black Haitian, who was the founder of Chicago. And that's why the museum has that name. So it was at the DuSable Museum, which for me was quite emotional. I'd never been to that building. I had been to the museum in Margaret and Charlie's house and spent time there, knew her, listened to her, and knew her passion for African and African-American history and culture. So it was there, and members of the Free School put together a documentary, which I highly recommend, called Paul Robeson, Man of the Future, which was viewed and warmly received. And then there was a panel of speakers, the education director of the DuSable Museum, a young man named Perry Diggs, the chief minister of Mas Meriam in Chicago of the Nation of Islam, Ismail Mohammed, who is also the son of Elijah Muhammad, and myself. And well, it was a great event. A couple hundred people came out, mainly from the Black community. And to me, it demonstrated once again how special of a place Chicago is, and that long history of the combined struggle for Black freedom and working class organization has made Chicago a very special place. And in spite of all of the difficulties, that working people have experienced over the last 50 years, there is still resonant a sense of radical politics, of left politics. And so the DuSable Museum is an institutionalization of a past and historic struggle, as is the Howard Washington Library, which is a monument in and of itself. And I spoke pretty much saying kind of what I said in the opening here. I tried to concentrate upon Robeson as a complete human being, and to talk about how he fits this moment in history because of the fact that he foresaw a civilizational reconstitution of humanity. And this is what I like to call the Afro-Asiatic reconstitution of humanity. A lot of people refer to this Afro-Asiatic axis as the global South. But the Afro-Asiatic reconstitution of humanity does not exclude Europe, but it just recenters humanity in humanity. It is a democratic process. This is what Robeson stood for. This is what he fought for. And I think his theory of socialism and his support for socialism was connected to his idea that as socialism would achieve successes, so would the forward movement of human civilization. And for example, in China or India, where hundreds of millions of people had been locked into the past, they were now awakening to the future. And what we see today is a new awakening, a new consciousness of global humanity. And by the way, not excluding the people of the United States. We are part of the same historic trajectory that has taken over much of humanity at this time. So that's kind of what I talked about. Others spoke in their own ways. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but that's what I said.
That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's sort of the historical view of societal alienation and the overcoming of imperialism and colonialism and all of this in this new multipolarity, as it's sometimes called, that's rising now. That I think, like you say, the U.S. is a very big part of, but no longer a hegemonic power over the rest. Instead, a part that makes up a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. I would agree with you, Noah. Can I just say one small thing? You see, I think the real potential for socialism is not just what it achieves in economic terms. I think its real potentiality is what it opens up civilizationally. the human factor is liberated. So now billions of people see themselves as part of history. Whereas before, these same people lived in isolated villages, knew more about their past than their present or future sometimes. And now they see themselves as part of global humanity. Take China. In 1949, the majority of Chinese did not read, write, or know anything about the outside world. Today, almost every Chinese understands his or her place in the world. We could say the same thing about the Russian Revolution. And at this time, I think it's so interesting, as you mentioned, Noah, multipolarity, or what I think is a better description, a new democratic internationalism, a new people, a new consciousness is sweeping the globe. And this is what Robeson was trying to explain. Great, and by the way, a great public intellectual. You know, he really defines what a public intellectual is, and he really defines what courage is. And we might want to talk about the attacks upon him during McCarthyism, etc.
We'll definitely get to that one.
Yeah. I want to jump in with a question quick. It has to do with some of the historical nihilism that we see on the left today. You mentioned that Robeson saw himself as an American. So what did that mean, to him to be an American? And is that important?
Oh, it's very important because it was his statement of a belief in the American working class and in the American people. And what he was saying is that for the American people to really become democratic and to really become American in the sense of the traditions of revolution and change, they would have to come to terms with the history of slavery and the history of the Black freedom movement. And of course, what he was saying is not only did they have to become, but they in many ways already were aware of this. And it was this ideological divide between the American people who strive for democracy and the ruling class, which attempts to limit it, destroy it, and keep the American people separate. So yeah, that's what Paul Robeson was doing.
What role would you say that? Oh God, I gotta get some W240 on this goddamn chair. What role would you say that played when he's getting attacked by HUAC? Because his speech is one of the things that we love the most to play on the channel and to discuss. Because unlike a lot of what happens on the left today, he defended himself as deeply American, as representing the best parts of this American tradition, and as those that were attacking him as the real un-Americans.
That's right.
Right?
As even neo-fascists. Yeah.
Right.
As carrying on the banner of Hitlerism.
Yeah.
That's the way he defended himself. He defended himself by not just defending himself, but defending the American people's right to democracy. Huge strategy, a great political strategy, a great courageous move on his part to not make himself the center of it all, but to see the attack upon him as an attack upon democracy, upon the African American people, and upon democracy itself.
And not only that, an attack on as an attack on American people, an attack on the sort of spirit we embody and the ideals that we take in to ourselves, like the freedom of speech, the right to assembly, These
That's
kind
right.
of things are important, and we've been looking into censorship and all of these things quite a lot recently because of what's happened with the Institute and us getting censored. But I think that's really what was happening, that the ruling class was worried that simply Robeson speaking was
Yeah,
dangerous for
yeah,
them.
yeah. Because, his ideas resonated. How could they say he was an agent of a foreign government? When in fact he spoke most eloquently and brilliantly on behalf of democracy, but not as it has been, but what it can become based on what it has been. I mean, it's a brilliant strategy. And of course, then he turns to the music of the American people. And he says, this is what it shows. Not just legal rights, but the substance of democracy, people's rule. And, it's no secret. He saw that the full flourishing of American democracy could be realized pretty much only with the overturning of the rule of the small, tiny financial oligarchy. And they knew what he was saying, and they knew how much it resonated. And it's a message for right now. I'll tell you the truth.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? It anchors thought and strategy. Take that out, you're just unanchored, ungrounded. As you say, Carlos, you ultimately, people who are without an anchorage ideologically ultimately resort to pessimism and nihilism and selfishness and egotism and narcissism. They can't see what Paul Robeson saw, and hence seeing what he saw was a determinant in how he fought.
And I think that's why sort of the work that groups like the Free School do is so important. Educating the people in how to see things clearly, exchanging these ideas, is specifically what our ruling class does not want us to do.
No,
They
absolutely.
don't want us to see with the clarity that a sort of materialist historical view of the American people gave to Robeson. And so they give us all these fake theories like the post-colonialism and whatever else, all these new bourgeois theories. And this sort of fills that place that an actual clear idea could fill.
Yeah, anything with post on it, you got to be skeptical of. But you mentioned that there's a certain homology with the time that Robeson is being attacked and ours, and I think that's very clearly we see it not only in these new ideological fields of technology where people are getting censored, different other activities are going on, bots, some voices are elevated, some voices are shadow banned, but you see it in real life too. We've had contributors to our institutes fired. Eddie got fired in part because of the work that he's done for the institute. I've received emails to my employers trying to get me fired for some of the work that we've done, and you've seen other people like the African People's Socialist Party that just had 4 of its leaders indicted on the BS charges of them being like agents of Russia or something, and they were indicted under the same law that Robeson and Dubois were. So can you speak a little bit about some of the attacks that Robeson faced and some of the similarities that you might be seeing today, and maybe if you want to bring up that topic of the African People's Socialist Party and the indictment by the FBI on their group as well.
Well, in going after Robeson, they were going after a representative of the most advanced forces politically and ideologically in the country. Robeson was not merely a singer, he represented the most advanced thinking to come from the American people. And by silencing him, they were attempting to silence the voices of the most advanced. And I say that to make the point that every attack the government makes on people to limit their civil liberties and civil rights is not of the same quality. And I think we have to see a difference, what Robeson represented. For example, it is very clear that the ruling class is attacking the Uhuru movement. It is very similarly attacking Trump. Isn't that ironical? And others of what they call the far right. But I would suggest that these attacks, which we must defend against, are not of the same magnitude as the attack in that time, that is the 50s and 60s, upon Robeson, and the continued attack upon him by distorting his legacy and erasing him from public discourse. So I just want to make that point. So, everything is not the same. Often there are qualitative differences. And in attacking Robeson, again, they were attacking the most advanced forces in the struggle. The other thing is that that Robeson was a special type of internationalist. It's one thing to be an internationalist and proclaim one's solidarity with all the peoples of the world. It's another thing to make the same proclamation of solidarity with all the peoples of the world, but then be able to speak their languages and sing their songs. So he was a special type of internationalist, and he meant a whole lot to a lot of people throughout the world, many people throughout the world, especially in Africa and Asia, and in particular in these two huge countries, India and China. And so he was loved. The only figure that approached the love and respect that Robeson had from the people of the world was Muhammad Ali. Those two. But that's what I would say about that.
That's a really good point. And it's a somewhat scary one, because if Robeson was that big, and he was getting at least in some ways attacked similarly to some people today, it means that the level of how substantial of a threat you have to be has kind of dropped in some ways to get attacked, which it shows that the volatile character of the material conditions we exist in are definitely there. You mentioned, I think it was before we actually went live, that you were talking a little bit about Robeson's son and the role that he has played in manipulating and distorting some of the legacy of Robeson's life and work. Can you expand a little bit on that, please?
Fathers and sons don't always ideologically agree. Paul Robeson Jr., that is Paul Robeson's son, did not ideologically agree with his father. For example, Paul Robeson supported the Soviet Union and socialism. Paul Robeson Jr. did not. Paul Robeson Sr. understood democracy as connected to the creation of a new social and economic system, that under capitalism, the possibilities for democracy were diminishing. Paul Robeson Jr. did not agree with that. So, throughout the last years of Paul Robeson's life, I feel that his son did almost everything he could to, and I put quotes around this, cleanse the image or make acceptable, of course, to the ruling elite, the image of Paul Robeson, which meant separating him from the Soviet Union and creating a narrative that Paul Robeson had lost confidence, or as they would say, faith in socialism. And that his retirement, as it were, to his sister's house in Philadelphia was, as many would have it, an indication that Paul Robeson was not the same any longer, that he was a disappointed and broken man. I don't think that it is at all true. And Harry Belafonte, who visited, one of the few who was allowed to visit Paul Robeson, and the reason others were not was because of his son. But Harry Belafonte, who Paul Robeson mentored, and they loved each other, he said he visited Paul. Paul was physically not well, but he said to Harry Belafonte, "None of my views have changed. I remain the same as I always was." And that is what must be recovered. Now, there was a biography written or published in 1989 by Duberman. What was his first name? I forget his first name off the top. Martin Duberman, where he makes all kinds of speculative claims about who Robeson was in his later years, his last, let's say, 20 years. There is no evidence for any of this. And so part of what we in the Free School have and are attempting to do with our celebrations of Paul Robeson is to demonstrate that fact. Because see, if Paul Robeson, one of the great and most passionate defenders of the Soviet Union and of socialism, if Paul Robeson had given up on socialism, then how could any of us be convinced that it was the future? And that was the point of the whole thing. But I think, just like with you all, a new generation of people are trying to find the actual Paul Robeson, this revolutionary, this scientist, this artist, this extraordinary and complete human being. Who was this, and what can we learn from him for this time?
I think we're all sort of trying to rediscover all of these revolutionary heroes, all of these American heroes, because during the last period of our history, they were hidden from us. They were taken from us. And so we're sort of stumbling in the dark, trying to find here and there mentors who'd been around, who can share those stories with us, trying to read everything we can and trying to help each other learn the truth of it, because the version we get is very obviously not correct.
If we get
Yeah.
any at all, sometimes, right? Because it's sometimes you don't even get a version. And but you mentioned Belafonte visiting Robeson, and unfortunately, he just recently passed. He was another giant in the struggle for peace and democracy and freedom and socialism, and a terrific artist as well, just like Robeson was. Can you talk a little bit about what what role do you see art having in freedom movements?
Well, I see the same thing that Robeson and Belafonte and all of them saw. That I think Robeson, I think he was quoting another artist, said that the artists are the legislators of humanity. Art, and I'm not talking here about entertainment, I'm talking about art, is that great force, the spiritual force that instructs. And here I'm using a word that Belafonte used when he talked about Robeson and Du Bois. He said they gave us instructions, but art instructs. Artists are teachers of the masses. Without art, there is no movement, I don't think, or it's a very empty project. But unappropriated art, when art is appropriated by the ruling elites, the point is to turn it into entertainment for themselves. Real art speaks to the people. And, that's the role of art. I mean, art has always been a revolutionary force. You talk about Beethoven. Beethoven hailed the French Revolution until Napoleon, started talking about he's an emperor. Beethoven said, I thought you were about democracy, money, and here you are about yourself. And so the Ninth Symphony, which was to be a ode and a celebration of Napoleon, Beethoven renamed it. And so that's art. That's great art. I mean, and we have the same thing in this country. The tradition of great art in the United States is unbelievable. So that's the thing.
I think
for the younger generation, and I have absolute sympathy for you all, because your generation, in my mind, has not yet produced great art. Has not yet. And until that occurs, there's going to be a unevenness in the revolutionary development and the revolutionary consciousness of the generation.
I think I'm a musician, and I've been playing. I mean, I have some stuff back there if you can see it.
Yeah.
But I've been playing since I was 15, bass and guitar and mandolin, a little drums. I sing, believe it or not well, but I've been sort of up close in this. And when the ruling class gets its hands on even any sort of band or whatever, it is exactly like you see portrayed in books and shows and movies. They take it. They own you.
Oh, yeah.
And they change what you're creating. Now, no one here will ever find it, but there is a video I'm in on MTV and a band I was on. The entire video we had no creative control over. They hired a director who told us what to do and all of that. But I think an even more stark look at how that works is to look at a sort of independent country and Western versus, Luke Bryan and the pop that wears a cowboy hat that these giant corporations call country music. But jazz can be viewed the same way, right? There's a very big difference between Thelonious Monk and Kenny G. You know what I mean? They tell you Kenny G is jazz. Is it? Just like they tell you Luke Bryan is country. Is it?
I saw a video the other day of Chris Christopherson and Johnny Cash and the Highwaymen. I believe they were talking about the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and the funding of the Contras, and it just made me so sad. Like, where are the country artists who, are talking about this stuff today?
Very good point. Joe Strummer from The Clash wrote a beautiful song called Sandinista about them. Really, really great song.
That's where Vijay Prashad got the inspiration for Washington Bullets, because that's one of the songs on that album, actually.
Mm-hmm. It's a good song too. Everything. I love The Clash. They're great.
I think
they actually were really critical of what you were just speaking of, Doc, and the other punk rock bands that were around. There's this line they write in another beautiful song they have called White Man and Hammersmith Palace, right? And it's about going to Jamaica and meeting these revolutionaries. But he's talking about back in England and bands like the Sex Pistols and the Damned, and he talks about them turning rebellion into money and laughing about it. And how if Adolf Hitler showed up at their venue, they would send a limo to go get him.
Yeah, that's the universal commodification of all things. Yesterday we were talking about how it infiltrates medicine, and it's so in your face about how contradictory it is, because you have to, provide a Hippocratic oath. But I think there's somewhat of a similar contradiction with art, because even the way that people subconsciously think about the art that they're making is still imbued with somewhat of the ethos of the aim of it is almost itself, its own sake, its creativity, and the sort of beauty that you can express through it. It's a form of engaging with truth, which I think is a deeply human activity. I very much agree with the first line of Aristotle's Metaphysics, that all men by nature desire to know, and art is a form of knowledge.
Yes,
But
is the question.
I think the art, however, is a good segue to the Du Bois section of the interview. Last time we spoke, we talked a bit about Dr. Du Bois' legacy and why it's so important for American communists to recapture. Many of us at the Institute see Du Bois as the father of American Marxism, as the first person to give, thanks to his analysis of racism and the color line, Marxian socialism, in sort of the way that Dimitrov would say it, its national form. In other words, he's the first to properly flesh out the unique forms the class struggle has taken in our country. It's a real shame that his Black Reconstruction is not often considered with other world historical texts of the modern era, such as Kant's First Critique, Hegel's Science of Logic, or Marx's Capital. The Saturday Free School, along with our institute, do not undermine Du Bois, though, and you guys have been spending the last few months going over the seminal text. Can you tell us a little bit about why Black Reconstruction is so important, and what American Marxists in particular should be taken away from it?
Yeah, it's so much to say because, Carlos, the misunderstanding and really trivialization of this great work is unbelievable, I agree with you completely. Black Reconstruction is one of the great revolutionary and scientific works of the modern epoch. And what he establishes, I think, is the form and substance of the logic of the class struggle in the United States. This is a huge achievement. I don't think anyone else has done that. Most Marxists, when they talk about the models of revolution, look to the European experience. They have a very superficial understanding of the American experience and the American working class. I think an important, really decisive, categorical achievement in Black Reconstruction is Du Bois's discovery of the Black proletariat. At one period, in fact, the majority of its time in the United States, it was an enslaved proletariat. And this to me is a great discovery, because one, it establishes that that slavery and being a working class, a proletariat, are not contradictory. Slavery was a form of capitalist exploitation of a part of the working class of the United States. That's what Du Bois discovers. One might wish to differ with the fact that he sees the Black proletariat as strategic and central to the class struggle. And he looks at it almost dialectically, that the Black proletariat is not separate from the proletariat as a whole, but it is dialectically the proletariat as it is becoming, which is to say, and this is all over Du Bois's work, that as the working class develops consciously and organizationally, it ceases to be separate entities and becomes one class. But it is the Black proletariat that is the exemplar of that to which the general working class is evolving. To put it another way, James Baldwin had this formulation that America would be the last white nation. As white working people evolve into consciousness of themselves as part of a class, whiteness no longer functions for them or on their behalf. Their class consciousness is a realization that whiteness is an identity which separates and obscures their relationship to the dynamic side of the proletariat, and that is the Black proletariat. So, that's kind of what I take away from it. Of course, it is an interpretation, an extension of it. It's a revolutionary work. It is a work about revolution and counter-revolution. It is a work about the dictatorship of the Black proletariat. It is a work about democracy and socialism. I don't know how it gets any better than that. I think it is a worthy companion to Karl Marx's Das Kapital. I don't know how an American revolutionary can read Das Kapital and not want to continue his or her work by reading Black Reconstruction. Yeah, but that's, I would say that. And by the way, I think Robeson was deeply influenced by Du Bois's Black Reconstruction and the thesis in it. And I think, and I pretty much know, he didn't just read the book. He had opportunities to discuss it with Du Bois, because you might know that Du Bois and Robeson were members of an organization they co-founded called the Council on African Affairs. They shared so many common projects, as you know, and I'm certain that Robeson's concept of democracy and the dictatorship of the proletariat as a democratic state form was very much related to the ways that Du Bois talks about the dictatorship of the black proletariat in several states of the former Confederacy.
Wow. Yeah. You mentioned something that really, really struck me, and it was when you spoke of what you were taking away from Black Reconstruction. And I mean, it's informed by hindsight, right? And seeing the process that they describe in action as it happens. And I think just to sort of add on to that, that the Marxist worldview informs us on how things develop and change. As a thing becomes old and obsolete, it undevelops while a new thing is rising to take its place. They form one thing where the development is the undevelopment of the old thing, right? And so this is the process of the American people becoming the American people.
Absolutely.
More and more, we overcome these divisions the ruling class has set upon us. And like you say, whiteness becomes obsolete.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it anymore.
Mhm.
And what it gets replaced with is this growing awakening that is sort of on the cliff edge, on the verge of class consciousness now.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I just my humble production in the next few years, we're going to see that really just exploding all over the working classes as this process I call reproletarianization happens, which we don't have to get into now.
No, if I could just just build on what you're saying. Remember Marx in his 11 Theses on Feuerbach. The last one says, "Philosophers have interpreted the world. The point is to change it." Well, the sad thing is that what we call Marxism and Marxist have become precisely what Marx warned against in the 11th Thesis. It is merely a way to interpret the world and not to change it. And I forgive me if I'm wrong about this, but most people who self-proclaim as Marxists turn out to be dogmatists who do not have an interest in changing the world, and as you said, one of you said, are so hostile to their own people and their own working class. Here you are, I am a Marxist, and I hate my working class. I don't know how you can be both.
Right. It's I think dogmatism is the perfect word for it, because dogmatism is having this fixation with certain set conclusions, and that's how they treat Marxism. They align themselves with the conclusions. They throw out the method. They throw out the worldview, and in doing that, they might have the conclusions. They might have the lingo and the jargon, but they don't have the substance. They're missing the
Yeah.
dialectical materialism, which is the heart of the Marxist worldview.
Well, if Lenin proceeded as a current Marxists do, we would never have Lenin.
Right.
Very
He
true.
creatively developed it. I contend that Du Bois creatively develops Marxism and Leninism. In fact, in the free school, and everybody doesn't have to go along with this, we think it is possible for a new synthesis of the Leninist and Du Boisian philosophical and theoretical traditions.
That's
Oh, good. I'm sorry.
no, that's okay. I have a problem with interrupting people, as Carlos and Eddie will both tell
We've been
you.
joking about buying him one of those Amazon things that shock. The thing they used to shock their workers, we
Yeah.
can virtually shock them every time that.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, I deserve it.
We're getting one for
I'm
each other. So all of the flaws that we got, we get to shock each other when they come out.
But this is actually like our next question centers around this, but I think Carlos had something he wanted to add first.
Yeah, I just had a quick comment because it's so revolutionary to think about what takes place in the American South as a dictatorship of the proletariat.
Yeah.
Right? And the only reason why people don't do so in the U.S., I think national nihilism has a a role to play with it. But it's also this dogmatism where the dictatorship of the proletariat is then attached to just Marx and Engels' observations on the commune, which are taking place around the same time as these projects during Reconstruction. And unfortunately, Marx and Engels were not able to see in those developments during Reconstruction what Du Bois was able to see, which is that this is a form of the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that you have to study reality itself as these struggles are unfolding and see what you can learn from these different forms. And I think that's one of the most brilliant things that Du Bois, one of the central discoveries in that text. And I was recently at a panel on the commemoration of the Paris Commune, and these are done every year. Like almost everyone does this, and I think it's good. It's good to learn from the Paris Commune. But I don't see the yearly events on Black Reconstruction, on the era of and at least American Marxists should be doing that. Absolutely. It's our dictatorship of the proletariat that started before the Paris Commune and lasted a hell of a lot longer. And its influence, I would say, it's the counter-revolution of property that overthrew it. It's a hell of a lot more influential in subsequent world history than was the overthrow of the Paris Commune. Even though it was tremendously.
There's no way you got it. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm just agreeing. Yeah.
And another quick point, I'm sorry, because I've been working on this for the last few months, but, it's not just a matter of maybe we haven't read the correct people. Maybe there's someone before Du Bois who puts this thesis up. No, Du Bois is the first one. I have here Morris Hillquist's History of Socialism in the United States. This was like the first official textbook of American socialist history. Before that, there was one that mainly focused on the utopians. But this text gets published in 1904. It gets republished in 1910 so that he can write about what the Socialist Party had done in that time. No mention of Reconstruction. No mention of 4 million Black proletarians freed in the South. Very scant mention on the Civil War and its influence in the development of the nation and the class struggle, even though it's got a long chapter on the First International, for whom the Civil War was so fundamental.
Yeah,
it's just it's completely absurd, and that's why Du Bois is, for me at least, I'm gonna continue saying it, that he's the father of American Marxism. No one grasps the pulse of the class struggle in the U.S., the form it takes here, as Du Bois does. He's the first, and then you get great books from people in the party afterwards. I think Foster's The Negro People's Place in American History.
Yeah.
Builds on that tradition, and so does Winnie and a bunch of others, but they're building on Du Bois.
Yeah. And your point, I think, would be supported, or you're supporting a point made by Noel Ignatieff, the guy that wrote How the Irish Became White, and public intellectual. He makes that point, I think, also. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to lead us beautifully into our next question, because in the U.S., it's always going to come back to Du Bois. It begins everything. So one of the central ideas that you put forth in your writing is the revolutionary synthesis of Du Bois and Lenin that you spoke about, right? Mm-hmm. Could you tell us just a little bit about it? Because we absolutely love this idea, right? It seems very, very similar to the way we see things, which kind of makes sense if you think about it, as we all sort of must come to similar conclusions if we're thinking about revolution and history scientifically. For us, Lenin is already sort of embodied within Du Bois, doing the same work. He begins what we call American Marxism, which is sort of a category that we've come up with rather than just a word. Or to sort of describe that, the particular application of Marxist-Leninism to the American context, and not only the rediscovering of the foundations of our own revolutionary science in our era, but bringing that foundation with us into analysis of the modern day. So really, we want to know just what your thoughts are in general on the subject and sort of expand from what we've been talking about recently.
Yeah. This synthesis is something we're working on. And it's our attempt to come to terms with what is new in the 21st century, and even with class and class struggle and race in the United States. And the US might be one of the most difficult countries to understand from a revolutionary and scientific standpoint. And the experience of the Russian Revolution is pretty much based upon the left and revolutionary traditions of Western Europe. And Lenin adapts much of that in a critical way, by the way, not, just taking it whole cloth and attempting to apply it to Russia. But he advances science, and that's the key thing. And he's attempting to advance science as necessary for a revolutionary party to develop and for a revolution to occur, for there to be revolutionary leadership. In other words, leadership was connected to science and ideas and empirical investigation of the actual situation. Mao does the same thing in China, and everyone. So Du Bois was doing that in the United States. And, Du Bois says, I want my work to be rigorous and scientific, which meant that he would draw upon all of the discoveries of radical science. He said openly in many works that Karl Marx was the greatest philosopher that he knew of, that he praised the Russian Revolution and Lenin and Stalin, and on and on and on. But there are limitations to what Lenin discovered. He was not looking at or thinking about the revolutionary process and the class struggle in the United States, although he and Marx and all of their colleagues praised the American Revolution and the democratic traditions of the American people and the American working class. They did not study the United States, nor had they studied this decisive part of the American working class, that black working class, enslaved at one point, partially freed, Jim Crowed and oppressed on the basis of race and nationality, but always class anchored. And you don't need to know a whole lot about Black people to see the class manifestations, the class conscious manifestations in Black life. So Du Bois saw this, he studied it, and he was studying Black folk as a working class, and that goes back to his doctoral dissertation in 1895, where he refers to the so-called slaves as workers. And then, of course, he further develops it in Black Reconstruction. But in this sense, the great achievements of Lenin, particularly certain areas that I am particularly taken with in Lenin, One, his approach to the study of philosophy, where he establishes that philosophy is a social enterprise, that to understand philosophies, you have to understand their class foundations and orientation. I like all of that. That is very helpful in theoretical and ideological critique. The other thing is Lenin's concept of democracy, which was wide. It included freeing the working class, freeing the peasantry, but also freeing oppressed nations, the right of nations to self-determination. But then his understanding of the state, and it is, out of Engels and out of Marx, but his idea that the dictatorship of the proletariat was an answer to the dictatorship of the capitalist class, and that the dictatorship of the capitalist class comes to power proclaiming its commitment to democracy, but ends up undermining it in the name of its class interest. This is hugely important. The other thing I guess I should say is Lenin's focus upon peace as an imperative for the fullest development of socialism. All of that, and probably more, has to be taken into a new synthesis, a new scientific development, which addresses the scientific and ideological problems of the class struggle and the revolutionary process in 21st century United States.
Wow. The only thing Lenin's philosophical notebooks
Yes,
is one of my favorite things in the entire world. And it's what has helped me sort through all of the really deep, difficult problems within this realm.
yeah,
The rest of it, of course. I would only say that imperialism itself and his explanation of how it begins.
absolutely. This is very important. I'm sorry, but yeah, you're absolutely right about that. You have to.
I also think that it's changed since then. And that we need to update ourselves for this new, what we call a higher stage of imperialism. There's a lot of Chinese theorists like Cheng Fu that use the same category. And this is central to some of our theory that we are creating here at the Institute. The purity fetish, for example, Carlos's book is a product of this higher stage of imperialism. Reproletarianization is a product of this higher stage of imperialism.
For sure. And kind of in that same vein, our next question is about the upcoming election. One of the things that we talked about last time was Trump, obviously. And since then, he's announced his new campaign and he's touting himself as the peace candidate.
Absolutely.
As is RFK, who also launched his campaign recently, talking about ending the proxy war against Russia and criticizing the new Cold War strategy in general, dismantling the CIA, among other things. So, like Trump, RFK is very far from perfect, but in some of the areas where it matters most, he's pretty good. So, what's your analysis of him and his campaign so far?
Well, Eddie, I think it's the same as yours. It's like, exactly what you say. For many on the left, these are inconvenient truths. And I say to them, get used to being uncomfortable, because a lot of what you accept as a truth or truths are not so true. Maybe they're half-truths. But I think the left is going to have to go through a wrenching process of being uncomfortable. and dealing with inconvenient truths. One, Trump is not a fascist. If he were a fascist, he would find it very easy to be supporting the Ukrainian regime. He doesn't. He is, as much as any American president in the last 80 years, he is a peace candidate, a non-war candidate. And if he is victorious, it will be a victory. Everybody knows this, including a big part of his followers, that Trump doesn't want war. And he believes that to make America great again, so-called, you have to have a world economy where there's no war. And Eddie, just like you say, I mean, if we were looking for perfection, we'd be waiting, for the reappearance of Jesus. That's not what we're doing. We're in the business of political change. And you're also right about RFK's candidacy, and very similar to Trump's. They want to talk every day, all day long in the media about Trump, and then not say a word about RFK, as though he doesn't exist, although he has over 20% of at this point, of Democratic voters saying they speak positively of him or they would vote for him. I think 2024 may be the most consequential election in 150 years in the United States, if not the most consequential, because it has everything to do with the logic and trajectory of U.S. imperialism and U.S. hegemonism. I read Trump as seeking a retreat from U.S. hegemonism, or as y'all call it, the new form of imperialism. And I think that's the real. In questions of war and peace, a peace economy, to the extent that he can articulate it. It's not us talking, but in its general broad outlines, you'd have to say that Trump is far more advanced than Bernie Sanders and AOC and the so-called progressive Democrats. He is, and certainly RFK is far more advanced. So, the best possible outcome for people like us is to have a general election with Trump and RFK. We might not get that, but that would be optimal because it would open up the space for real politics and for real discourse. I know one writer said that Bernie was introducing class politics into the 2016 and 2020 elections. And I say, okay, it's according to what your definition of class politics are. But it was such a mild form as perhaps not to even meet the challenges of class politics at this moment of crisis of U.S. capitalism. I think Trump and RFK are way more advanced and pose a greater threat to the ruling regime than any on the social democratic side do. So if you ask me, I want Trump to win the Republican primaries, and I want RFK to win the Democratic primaries. I think each is, by the way, each is anti-NATO. Trump has said that he will be the retribution of those who feel they have been harmed by this ruling class. And there are a lot of people that feel that way. And quite interestingly, although it's not made a big thing of in the mainstream media, it looks like 30% of African Americans are looking favorably upon Trump. That number of Black people, the most loyal voters in the Democratic Party, if they, at that, and those numbers, leave the Democratic Party, there's nothing left of it.
I think that's exactly what we're seeing is the death of these two parties as well.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. Yes. Yes.
And I certainly think criticisms of RFK and Trump aside, of which there are many,
yes.
Them being the candidates would create more truth in the realm of political discourse. Despite what any disagreements we might have or whatever, the veil of, sorry to swear, the veil of bullshit by all of the bourgeois politicos is lifted with them. They speak like regular people. And that's one of the reasons they resonate with so many people. Because they're like, oh, this person's at least telling it like it is. Even when they're lying, they sound honest. And it puts a bigger space in there for truth.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right. And here now we're at the level of realpolitik.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's be real. I mean, are we in it, Carlos, to be pure? You know? Or are we in it to win it? Do we have certain objectives? And what are the stages of the development of this process? And we're not trying to put upon our people objectives which at this stage they are not capable of achieving. But they will, if certain processes are allowed to unfold. You know, they will. And of course, you know, for the African American working class to break the hold of the democratic establishment over their political behavior, I would suggest it has already occurred. If you look at the Philadelphia elections, you guys may have heard our analysis of it in the Free School. You know, only 75% of registered Democrats did not vote in a city where the Democratic Party is 60% African American. It's a Black party, but they did not vote. It's possible that 75 to 80% of Black registered Democrats did not even vote. What does that tell you? And this is the reality on the ground that we must understand and help to influence and be a part of. And this image of the white working class as bourgeoisified, as comfortable, as racist, as fascist, that is nonsense. It is the ruling class operating through the left. The majority of white working people are living either in poverty or close to it. You know, these people are talking about the working class as baristas and, you know, but no, we're talking about people who have been deindustrialized and are now working in nursing homes for minimum wages.
Reproletarianized.
Pardon me?
They're being reproletarianized.
Yeah,
The middle classes are dying away. Mm-hmm. And this is all that's left because the deindustrialization and austerity programs of the last period of history have left nothing else.
Yeah.
Now, I also think you say that it is the ruling class working through the left, and I think this is absolutely brilliant. And it brings out, especially when they call Trump and their movement a fascist movement or whatever,
Yeah.
It brings out their inability to understand things materially, right? They think fascism is just extra conservatism, or that it's based in the realm of ideas, when a more materialist scientific understanding of how society functions will show you that fascism is instead the ruling class going to whatever extremes it must to keep its hold on power and keep its system intact as things are deteriorating and crises become overwhelming. But when the working class is not sort of organized enough to push our own agenda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
A lot of the ones that are sort of calling themselves Marxists will misquote Georgy Dimitrov on this, right? When they'll say that fascism is the most brutal dictatorship of the most chauvinistic, most reactionary elements of finance capital. And that's true, but they don't understand what he says. He's speaking in a general way. So what they hear when they say most reactionary, most chauvinistic is a particular form of this within the past. They can't understand that it changes over time as our conditions change. And what is most chauvinistic now is not necessarily what is most chauvinistic, in Germany in the 1930s.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Far more sophisticated ruling class.
100%. Far more and more insidious, because
Yes.
one of our contributors who works for the Troika Collective as well used a great word for it on on a phone call with me earlier today. His name's Danny Shaw, brilliant guy, and he called it intersectional imperialism.
He's a professor, right?
Yeah.
I think I know him. I don't know that I know him personally, but I know of him and his work. Yeah. No, I mean, most people who, like ourselves, only want the best for our people can see this breakup of the rule of the ruling class, crisis of legitimacy, can't rule in the old way. I mean, come on. You can't see that? I remember I was on a podcast and I mentioned that I had gone to the February 19th March for Peace. Oh, you went to that? Yes, I went to. How could you be a part of a libertarian party and all of that type of thing? I said, well, what was the issue? Peace. And then you get the so-called left claiming to take back the issue of peace. And I always ask the question, well, if you are the left, why do you want to take peace back from the people? I don't care what party they identify, but these are people involved in politics and ideas, whatever. That's not good enough for you. And I thought it said everything at the end of the day about a good part of the left. I don't consider them a left. I consider them a fake movement, fake movements, who are mainly, again, like you say, petty bourgeois elements. And of course, the petty bourgeois, the middle classes, are hysterical, and they should be for all kinds of reasons. But don't use us to virtue signal your own hysteria. That's all I say. I mean, y'all do y'all, and so on and so forth. But don't try to impose that on all of us.
Well, here's my thing, and I think it's something that my father taught me, is that if you are correct, that will stand on its own. There's not a need to tear anyone down. And I am confident enough in our ideas and what we bring to the table that I don't need to try to attack anyone else. I'll just put it against them and say, you know what? people can choose. And you know what? If they're better and they're right and they're doing something, I'm going to go with them anyway.
That's right. That's right. And always give the working class a fighting chance.
Absolutely.
All right. I think some of the comments you made about the white working class and the left fit well with this super chat comment we got from our friend Paul, who said, "Why is the theory of settler colonialism so popular among the left in America today?"
Well, because you got to ask, who is the left? What are they made up of? I mean, ideas kind of take hold among certain forces, like the idea of settler colonialism, which became very popular in the last year, maybe 2 years. In about a year and a half, you're not going to hear anything about it, because that's the way things go with the petty bourgeois, the middle classes. They are unstable, and they attach themselves to whatever seems to be popular. And then you take academics, young academics who want to be assistant professors or are assistant professors and want to be associate professors. That's what they do. You know, I mean, to use Noah's language, is talk shit. That's what the job description is. So popular among the left. Well, who is the left? That's the big question. Yeah, I agree with what he just said. To deal with failure, but also to deal with the fact that, you know, people who are espousing these ideas often have very weak knowledge of and participation in revolutionary movements. I can say that with a certain amount of confidence about the authors of the settler colonialist thesis. Know them. And a thin revolutionary experience at best.
It often feels like sometimes they try to organize people and they go to them and they don't do it. They don't succeed. And so rather than looking inward at what they might be doing wrong, thinking wrong, etc., they blame the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it must not be me. I'm perfect.
That's right.
It's the people who are to blame.
But let me say this, you know, Noah, just like you, I, and Carlos were talking before the live streaming started. So many people suffered shock and trauma with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and ideologically, they were unmoored, unanchored, and so they went wherever they could be accepted back, you know, because many of them were on the margins of bourgeois society. So how do you get back in? You know, you become an advocate of the lesser of two evils, vote for Hillary Clinton, and, you know, unapologetically, uncritically support Obama for 2 terms. And then you come up with anti-working class theories like settler colonialism, when the people who are claiming this now, at another period, were talking about the unity of the working class.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So, I mean, I try to attribute it to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the world communist movement. And they're not having an anchor or a compass to proceed through, in and through the crisis. You know, a lot of people, and I'll shut my mouth at this, a lot of people can be revolutionaries in good times, but when things hit a wall, they throw in the towel. That's what differentiates them from a Paul Robeson.
Mm-hmm.
When times got hard, he he really stood stronger, stood taller, until he couldn't stand anymore. Emotional collapse, emotional exhaustion. It happens. It happens, man. Warriors are human beings too. And just because you're revolutionary don't mean that you can't fall on the battlefield or be weakened on the battlefield. That's what happened to Paul Robeson. You know, he gave it all, man. That's when you really put it all together and you see a human being that said, I will do everything in my power to prevent nuclear war, and meant it, and never apologized for the positions that he took, never apologized, and always to the end believed in the fight for the unity of working people, believed in working people. That's what we have to learn. Believed in, because he said, my father was a slave. That meant an enslaved proletariat. To go against the working class Robeson reason was to go against my father and my ancestors. Well, to the left, these leftists, can you say that? Do you know what that means? Do you know where that comes from? If not, just chill, shut up, get on the sidelines, and do you. But don't get, all of this attacking working people as Nazis and settlers, and please,
Most of them seem to have not grown out of their teenage angst phase where they're hating their fathers anyway.
Well,
I hate to say that, but it's...
Yeah, but the ones I'm talking about have a different political history.
Oh, I know.
I just don't want to name names. I mean, you guys are probably talking about, the generation after us, like you guys. But I'm talking about the ones that went through a lot of revolutionary fires, saw the emergence of the National Liberation Movement, the Chinese Revolution, yada, yada, yada. And then suddenly, one of the central forces in the world revolutionary process is taken down. A lot of people just couldn't recover from it. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, and this leads us really, really well into our next question, doesn't it, Carlos?
Yes, it does. This is a good comment, though, from Sam. 10 degrees to the left of center in good times, 10 degrees to the right of center when it affects them personally. That's the great Phil Orks. Unfortunately, died by his own hand. But the following question, a lot of people are talking about the comments that Norman Finkelstein made about Angela Davis not too long ago. For us, many of these criticisms rang somewhat true. We had a segment on it, Eddie and I, we discussed it further, elaborated on some other things. And even though we have a few contentions with Finkelstein himself, we saw that you put forth a really valuable critique of Finkelstein's position on Robeson.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, we'd like to show you the viral video. It's short, it's 3 minutes, that's been going around to get your thoughts on what Finkelstein said and how you would approach the question of someone like Angela Davis. So someone else is going to have to pull up the video, because if I open more than 2 tabs on my old computer, it's just going to have an AI heart attack or brain aneurysm of some sort. It's just going to blow.
Can you get that, Eddie? Since I am, old and don't.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was muted. I've got it right here.
Cool.
Is the Angela Davis Roadshow, the prison abolitionism? Because is prison abolitionism on the historical agenda now? Is that on the agenda? That's why wherever Angela goes now, and believe me, I say this with pain and anguish. Angela Davis was a heroine of my youth. I held her in the highest regard, but what she's turned into is simply laughable. Where all these white liberals go to hear her lecture on prison abolitionism, and they all nod their head as Angela and Gina Dent, speak very seriously about this. Of course, because it has no connection with reality. And you get to be with Angela and you get to talk about, prison abolitionism, which has nothing to do with anything. Prison abolitionism is, if you read Lenin, Lenin's State and Revolution, yes, you eliminate all the repressive forces of society, he said, all the special apparatuses of repression, of which prisons are one. The special apparatuses of repression, he said, that doesn't come until, and I'm quoting him now, the highest stage of communism, okay? We're going to eliminate all the special forces of repression. Now I ask you, Sabrina and Angela, if you're listening, are we anywhere near the highest stage of communism? Are we near that? Then what are you talking about? This has nothing to do with anything. It's just a hot ticket item on Martha's Vineyard, or when it's true. And then she goes around to all of these Ivy League universities where people like Amy Gottman, who I knew, this milquetoast liberal who taught at Princeton, and then she was the president of U of P. Now she's the American ambassador to Germany. Amy Gottman, this milquetoast liberal is literally, she is in a state of nirvana, euphoria, introducing Angela Davis, who's going to speak on prison abolitionism. Now, I really have to ask myself, Sabrina, and I'm dead serious about this. If I were being introduced by, say, George Soros, I really would have some questions about what is it I'm saying that George Soros likes so much? Okay, George Soros and I were both Jewish, but guess what? That's where it begins and that's where it ends. Otherwise, we have nothing in common. So I have to ask myself, why isn't Angela Davis asking herself, why am I getting all these hysterical, warm receptions from all of these filthy rich crooks? Why am I getting? I told you the story. You'll forgive me if I'm repeating myself. If you go to YouTube and you can put it up yourself. Angela spoke at the University of South Carolina, and she's introduced by this Southern belle with this huge shock of blonde hair, and she happens to be the second richest billionaire in South Carolina. The second richest billionaire in South Carolina. And she introduces Angela only half jokingly. She introduces Angela by saying, Angela and I have a lot in common. Angela and I have a lot in common. Okay, you don't have to be a purist, fine. And we have to make alliance, fine. But Angela, don't you pause to think why the second richest billionaire in South Carolina is introducing you?
So that was the viral video. I don't know. I appreciate it. I know we have our contentions with Norman, but I mean, what are your thoughts?
I don't, Carlos. I don't appreciate it. I think to talk about Angela and Finkelstein, you have to go back 50 years. Angela was a part of the civil rights movement. She's from Birmingham, Alabama. Her parents were part of the civil rights movement. She is arrested because she is connected to the Black Freedom Movement and to the Black Panther Party. Angela has a record, a resume of inspiring people and standing up. The Angela of today is not that Angela. But let's get it clear. Norman Finkelstein was never anything close to that. Never anything close to that. You see what I'm saying? So all of this histrionics and constantly, look, you made your point. The Angela of today is not the Angela of the past, right? We know that, as I said, but we honor the Angela Davis that was and critique whatever today. But Norman Finkelstein, you were never any of that anytime, including up till today. Who are you? You need to be a bit more modest. Now, several things about Finkelstein. He was giving a lecture, a presentation on Robeson. And, he knows it all. He's all, criticizes anybody that makes a small mistake in anything. And he says that Paul Robeson educated his daughter in the Soviet Union. Paul Robeson did not have a daughter. He had one son, no daughters, right? He made other claims about Robeson. While people were fighting for a broad front to free political prisoners, to end the war in Vietnam, and for civil rights, he, according to his own admission, was a wild Maoist, spouting slogans, attacking the movement. Finkelstein, what was your position on Martin Luther King? And don't tell me now, I want to know back then. Where did you stand on that question? But there's some other things that I don't appreciate about him. He's getting his moment now with this new book. And he has no boundaries, no limits. He says Angela was a heroine of his back in the days. Well, that's what you're saying. I have no proof of that. You could say anything now. And then he made a statement, by the way, that I took issue with. He said there are two great Black American intellectuals. First of all, to qualify, and he says they're Robeson and Dubois. Okay, I see them as great American intellectuals. There is no, who do you compare to Du Bois? Now,
Nobody. That's who.
yeah, I'm telling you, I mean, really consequent. Now, but he says Robeson and Du Bois, but what about Martin Luther King? And that suggests something, that there were only two, but not Martin Luther King. There are questions to be raised there. The other thing is,
well, can I jump in? I want to say something about Martin Luther King. I think a lot of that stems from, and Finkelstein's old enough to know differently, but a lot of that these days stems from people being taught this version of him that he was a liberal.
No. No. You're absolutely right, Noah. But I'm saying, you see, to contextualize Finkelstein's rant on Angela, and he just went on and on, almost orgasmically, hey man, chill, calm down, as though he is trying to paint her as a great counter-revolutionary, anti-revolutionary. But according to Finkelstein's narrative, he went from extreme Maoism to Professor Chomsky. No problem, you do you. But although you say Du Bois and Robeson are the great Black intellectuals of the 20th century, but you didn't go to either of them. And Chomsky is a great intellectual, no question about it. You see, then from Chomsky, he goes to John Stuart Mill. So who are you? And what are your revolutionary credentials? Now, he and I are about the same age. I was involved in the struggle against apartheid and for the freedom of the Portuguese colonies in Africa. I never saw you. Where were you? I mean, he is a hypocrite. He's a hypocrite. And there are other words I could use, but not on a podcast. But I'm not impressed. To attack it, that's easy. That's not difficult. And it would have taken one paragraph and then you out. Let's get on to the next thing. Like Bernie Sanders. You think Angela Davis? What about Bernie Sanders? What about the vote on funding the war in Ukraine? What about that?
Yeah, that's
He's still rocking with Bernie Sanders too, right? You don't see
Yeah,
him
he is.
Bernie
No, he's not. No, Bernie Sanders
right.
is still his somewhat hero.
Right, and that's he mentions the heroin. I didn't know his past, but the way you make it seem is like, at least from his ideological alignments, there's no way that at any point Angela or any of the people that are attached to that movement would have been his heroes, right?
They couldn't have been. Not back in the days.
Right.
Not back in the days. You're right, Carlos.
It's
Because
interesting because he premises the critique on that, so almost
yes,
as if to make it like the critique then legitimate, right? This is why I wanted to ask you about this, because I knew you were going to provide that sort of context.
I mean that, and Carlos, that's like me. You know, I'm like of that back in that days. You understand what I'm saying? I was deep in it, as they say, knee deep in it, so to speak. I was connected to the world communist movement. For him, I was an agent of Soviet revisionism. Let's be real, hometown. Now you're going to reprise your thing, because I don't know if there's any document or record of what he was doing back then. But if you were the extreme Maoist that you said you were, then you were attacking all of that. Martin Luther King was a bourgeois liberal. Paul Dubois was a Stalinist. Or not a they wouldn't say that's Trotsky, but something as bad. But
Well, they could these days they would call him an apologist for the settlers or whatever.
yeah, something like that. I mean, in other words, Finkelstein was not on the side of the forces pushing for fundamental change. He was not on this side. He probably, if he were a hardcore Maoist, probably was advocating for war between the Soviet Union and the United States to destroy, quote, both superpowers. I mean, he was such a crazy Maoist that he admits that when the Gang of Four were arrested, he couldn't get out of bed for, I think he said, 3 weeks. You know what I'm saying? Oh, it meant, so if you were that much in it, you couldn't be where Angela was and what she was fighting for.
That's right. I think it's. I had something to say and now it's disappearing as I speak. But I think it's really Maoists in general. Oh, this is what it is. It's sort of the point of having to always attack, right? Rather than having something to stand on. It's sort of like when, young so-called Maoists today will try to argue against China, aligning themselves with our ruling class as it attacks them. And you're like, well, what have you done? If you are such a great Marxist that you know better than every Chinese theorist, you know better than their entire 100 million strong Communist Party, you know better than a billion Chinese people, where is your revolution? Why haven't you led us to victory yet? Because clearly you know more, right?
And that's the problem. Eddie and I, when we were in undergrad, we would do these socialist night schools, sometimes at the school, sometimes at the local UAW, and it was open to the students and the community. And Angela was, like, early on such a big part of that, because we were very embryonic in our development, and we are trying to trace back this history. And she was a hero for us, and that legacy is still inspiring. It in some ways it's negated by the one now, but it's almost still there, right? There's that Angela that I feel like we could still get back. But we're in a time where the way we see it, there's such a crisis of leadership, right? There's a crisis of organization, a crisis of ideological unclarity, and also a crisis of leadership. And she would have been such an amazing leader.
Yeah.
Had she gone the route. And so that's that letdown that makes a point like the one Finkelstein is making.
Carlos, you got, we are all human beings.
Right.
That's subjective factor, sometimes you let it be. You know what I'm saying? You don't kick a person. While I consider Angela B down, I mean, she's not where she was. She knows that. So what am I going to do? Kick her in the head 20 times? You disappointed me. You said that, no, you did good, soldier. Rest. I mean, I know the woman.
I like that.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, hey, look, man, I didn't fall because I didn't have all that pressure on me like she did. She was up against, I mean, rest. Take a rest, soldier. That's
What
all.
would you say though? Because this is one of the things that we brought up when we were reacting to the video. I think when it came out, but like if she would have just gave up, like she stopped and it's just teaching, that would have felt like, yeah, like she's resting, but she's like still a public figure and she's still speaking, and that's what makes like the role that she has now one that in
Yeah.
some way like recuperates people into the pro-imperialist fold, because she's been in the pro-DNC side for a minute, and
Yeah.
it's not, I don't know if they, I don't know if she necessarily is taking that break, if not
She,
doing some other stuff.
believe me, Carla, she has, and then
She
because
gets pulled back in.
she wasn't, and there were a lot of reasons, human reasons, believe me. No, and you see, it's a way to do anything. We can criticize a soldier who is not on the battlefield any longer, and maybe seems to be too comfortable with the other side. I can go along with that. You know what I'm saying? But Finkelstein went overboard. I mean, what are you trying to prove? Ha ha ha. I mean, that's the way I feel about it. And I'll tell you another thing. See, a lot of black people will read that as a racist attack. If if we're gonna go, let a black person say some of that. You don't have to be the vanguard in putting her down. Yeah, and I've been critical of for a long time, but I understand what she was, and I know she's not that, and she knows she's not that. She knows she's not what she was, and she can't be what she was because what produced her is different now. And believe me, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and for a person like her, hey, what do I do now? There's no communist party. What protects me physically? Finkelstein, your life ain't never been threatened like that. You ain't never been on trial for murder. I mean, come on, man. All I'm saying is, just like everything, it's a way you do something. He just went all for him, and he don't have the credentials to do it. You don't have no revolutionary credentials as far as I can see. Now, maybe there's something hidden in the woods that I don't know about. But as far as I know, you ain't got no revolutionary credentials and no basis to attack any revolutionary because you ain't never been one. Now, that's the way I come at it. That's the way I come at it. I ain't no little girl trying to interview him that don't know nothing. I'm a grown-ass man from back in the days. If you want to go at it, you want to raise your voice, we'll both raise our voices. See, but all that, no, I don't like it. You went overboard. And why? And you do not have any revolutionary credentials to stand upon. You understand what I'm saying? If you ain't done nothing, shut up. Talking about you was in a small Maoist group shouting Maoist slogans. And we trying to free Angola and South Africa. And by the way, the Chinese government was on the side of the South African government at that time against the MPLA. So where were you? Don't tell me after the Gang of Four went down, then I went to Professor Noam Chomsky. But hold it, dog, before you get there, what were you doing in that time? You feel where I'm coming from? And I agree with you. We can critique Angela. She knows that that's been a story of her life. She's always been critiqued. You know, she's a public figure. But that's the way I have a little more feeling for her.
Yeah, that's obvious. I think to really break into it, what you're saying is basically it's not the critique itself, it's the way it's done and the person doing it in that way that is the issue for you. I think a lot of people in the chat sort of are looking at this on a very surface level right now, and it's bothering me. Listen to what you're saying now. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I would say not even, it's a question of human decency.
Right.
Well, thank you for your thoughts on that. I think, Eddie, you've been holding something for a while now, haven't you?
No. I appreciate you for giving me the chance, though. I'm just watching and learning.
You should be talking over me because I'm horrible, and you know that.
No, I've been horrible.
I'm just gonna start muting you.
That's a good idea. That's a very good idea. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for the night. We've been going on a little over 2 hours now.
Yeah.
Doc, thank you so much for coming on again.
Well, thank you all. I mean, I very, very much appreciate it because you all give me a chance to just talk like myself, you know, and just be kind of more real.
I feel you there.
Earth, you know.
Is there anything you would like to plug, by the way? Anything related to the Free School or anything else? Any upcoming events?
Yes, we are. On June 17th, we're doing what we call an intercivilizational festival of art and music and dance and poetry from many of the civilizations of the world that are present in Philadelphia. Everything from African dance and drumming to Cambodian dance to Chinese line dancing, to Indian dancing, to avant-garde jazz and folk music. And that's going to be on June 17th at the Church of the Crucifixion in South Philadelphia. Yes, and we're honoring Paul Robeson and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. A lot of people say, well, how can you put those two together? And I guess we put them together because they love the people, but really. And we could talk more about that. Especially when you love the people who feel that they are not worthy of love. And if you know anything about the Black community, one of our great problems is that many of us feel that we are not worthy to be loved. And you know, both men showed unconditional love for working people and the poor. Believe me. And Noah, you talk about heroin addiction. The first real heroin recovery program was in the Nation of Islam going back to the 50s. The first prison ministry they had, because they believed in the least of these often being the most capable. So we're putting the two of them together. Elijah Muhammad's 125th was last October, poorly acknowledged. Of course, Robeson's was this year in April. So that's what we're doing. So I mean, I hope everybody can come. By the way, the documentary we did, you all might be interested in showing, called Paul Robeson, Man of the Future.
Absolutely. I'll talk to Jake or somebody and get my hands on it.
No, talk to Meghna or Purba. You know Purba? Talk to Purba.
Okay.
Doc, we just got a quick question here from the audience. I don't know, would you mind titling it, or it's from Sam Dixon. He sent in a $10 super chat. He says, last question for the doctor. When engaging in critique, what tactics should we employ? In other words, how do we critique well, like you, and not critique poorly, like Norm? Thank you for your time.
Well, yeah, Sam. I mean, how do you, I mean, what do you say? I mean, a person that contributed so much and is not doing so now. You know, Angela's about 80 years old, by the way,
Right.
Although she still looks very good. I didn't appreciate Finkelstein. I think he was going overboard. I think it was him performing, showing how much of a revolutionary he is, rather than a substantive critique, which would have been all of a minute and a half. I mean, you went too far. You overdid it, and my question is, why did you go in like that on her? You know, it's so that's my point.
If I had any advice to give on critiquing anyone, be yourself, be respectful, even when someone is obviously operating in bad faith. Operate like they're not.
Yeah,
pretend that what they are saying is in good faith, and you will win respect and be able to get your point across to more people.
Yeah.
And do critique from a place of love, from the
absolutely
ability to even, expect someone is capable of change. That's another, the anti-dialectical metaphysical outlook that most people have, see people as static. They can't change. And because they don't see the potential in people, they don't take the time to, in a loving relationship, help them develop.
And you know something, Carlos? There's such a thing as being a bully.
Right.
Finkelstein was obviously bullying that young woman. She didn't know how to handle that. If you want to raise your voice with me, I can handle you. Yeah. I mean, just to let you know, I was at a thing up in New York, and he was there. I went over, hey man, how you doing? First question you're going to ask me is, why is Angela Davis selling T-shirts or something like that? Well, what you asking me for?
Like you're her keeper, or
yeah, right. I mean, just too much nickel and dime espionage.
See, I didn't even have that wider context. Even that small amount of context you just added really more clarifies it for me, and why you feel the way you do. It makes more sense. It makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, guys, it's been real.
Yes, it has.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to all who watched and sticked around. I knew we were going to get some fascinating and new perspective on things, as we usually do from Doc. So thank you very much, and you changed my mind about the reaction to the video, at least the form that he went about doing that. So thank you to all who watched, and make sure to check out the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation, and if you can, attend the intercivilizational dialogue that they're doing. We're going to festival. So you guys had a dialogue, I think.
Yeah, that's in Bangalore, India. Yeah.
Right. So we'll link everything to the video afterwards. So if you want to check that out, where's this festival again?
It's going to be at the Episcopal Church of the Crucifixion at 8th and Bainbridge in South Philadelphia. It will start. Doors will open at 10:30. It will go from 11 to 6 in the evening.
Perfect. So if you're in the area, make sure to pass by and show your support. Well, thank you so much, Doc, for being here with us, and thank you to all who watched. And we're going to go out with the International as we came in.
injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.